Have you noticed how your mind settles more easily when your days have a clear shape? Have you felt the quiet unease that appears when everything is open, but nothing feels anchored? Do you ever sense that too many choices create restlessness rather than freedom? Have you observed how effort feels lighter when it has a defined place to land? Do you recognize moments when structure doesn't feel restrictive but strangely calming? And have you wondered why, without some form of order, even rest can start to feel exhausting? For many men, structure is not about control or rigidity. It is a psychological container, a way for attention, energy, and responsibility to organize themselves. Without it, the mind remains in a low state of vigilance, constantly scanning and deciding. With it, effort gains direction, and calm becomes possible not because life is simpler, but because it is held within a form. There is a particular tension many men feel when life is technically open, yet internally unsettled. Nothing is wrong on the surface. Responsibilities are being met, time is being filled, and yet, beneath that movement, something feels uncontained. Attention drifts, effort scatters, rest does not restore. This is not the absence of freedom, it is often too much of it. When there is no clear frame holding one's energy, the mind stays alert in a low, constant way. Choices remain open longer than they should. Direction feels optional, and so nothing quite settles. Many men recognize this state not as anxiety, but as restlessness without urgency, motion without anchoring. What quietly emerges is not a desire for pressure or control, but for something more basic, structure that allows the inner world to stand still without collapsing. Structure is often misunderstood as rigidity, as limitation, as something imposed from the outside. But psychologically, structure serves a different function. It reduces the amount of inner negotiation required to remain coherent. Without structure, a man must constantly decide who he is in each moment. What matters now? What can wait? What should be ignored? That level of openness feels liberating at first, but over time it becomes exhausting. The mind remains active not because it is inspired, but because it has nowhere to rest. Many men notice that their clarity improves when their days have shape, not because they are forced into discipline, but because attention knows where to land. Desire becomes more intelligible. Focus stops competing with itself. Effort gains continuity. This is not about productivity. It is about orientation. Structure creates psychological boundaries that allow energy to circulate rather than leak. When those boundaries are absent, motivation is often mistaken for the problem. But motivation is unstable by nature. It rises and falls. It responds to novelty and emotion. It cannot carry long spans of time on its own. Structure, by contrast, does not rely on how one feels. It allows action to proceed even when enthusiasm is quiet. That steadiness produces something more valuable than intensity, trust in oneself. Men who lack structure often compensate with pressure. They push harder. They consume more stimulation. They search for momentum, but pressure without form increases inner friction. The system strains rather than strengthens. What many men are responding to, often without naming it, is the need for a consistent internal environment, one where choices do not have to be constantly renegotiated, where identity does not reset each morning, where the question of "what should I be doing" does not dominate mental space. Structure answers that question silently. It does not motivate, it removes noise. When structure is present, the mind becomes quieter, not because it is suppressed, but because it is oriented. And in that orientation, effort stops feeling like resistance and starts feeling like alignment. Over time, structure shapes identity, not in a dramatic way, but through repetition and containment. A man begins to recognize himself not through peaks of effort, but through consistency of presence. This is where self-mastery becomes less about control and more about reliability, not being strict with oneself, but being dependable, knowing that one's attention will show up in familiar ways, that one's energy has a place to go. Without structure, identity remains fluid but unstable. A man may feel capable one day and scattered the next, without understanding why. His confidence depends too heavily on circumstance. He does not distrust himself consciously, but he cannot fully rely on himself either. Structure resolves this quietly. It creates conditions where character can stabilize, where choices accumulate rather than cancel each other out, where effort compounds instead of restarting. Importantly, structure does not eliminate freedom, it clarifies it. Within a clear frame, freedom gains depth. Decisions become meaningful because they occur within a context that holds them. Rest becomes rest because it contrasts with form. Silence becomes inhabitable because it is not empty. Many men discover that when structure is absent, they feel pulled outward, toward distraction, toward excess, toward noise. When structure is present, attention turns inward without strain, not in isolation, but in coherence. This is why structure is not something to be added on top of life. It is something that allows life to settle into itself. The psychological relief it brings is subtle. It does not announce itself, but it is felt as steadiness, as reduced inner debate, as a sense that one's energy is no longer dispersing faster than it can be gathered. At a certain point, the question is no longer how to push forward, but how to hold oneself together across time. Structure answers that question without words. It does not promise intensity. It offers continuity. It does not demand effort. It receives it. When a man's inner world has form, his mind no longer has to defend itself against openness. His attention can rest. His actions can align. His sense of self becomes less reactive, less provisional. Nothing dramatic changes, and yet something essential stabilizes. In that stability, ambition becomes quieter but more durable. Discipline becomes less forceful but more trustworthy, and life, rather than feeling like a series of decisions to survive, begins to feel like a direction already underway. Structure does not confine the man. It gives him somewhere to stand.